I'm out of frame, aren't I? I know. I've been gone for a really long time. April? When did I upload last? Like, April. And I really don't have very good excuses. Trust me when I say there was a lot of homework involved, a lot of finals, and summer semesters, and then an injury.
Hey guys, this is me editing it right now. I filmed this in July and I ended up not editing it until mid-September because I continue to just be a failure at a YouTuber and I'm incredibly sorry, but I'm doing it now, I'm getting it done, and I hope you enjoy this video.
We're back. We're here. Weird Women of History is up and rolling again until I finish the next script, which may take a little while because I haven't done any of the research, but it doesn't matter. We're here. Today, we're going to talk about someone who I personally find super interesting. I had never heard of her before. She wasn't even in my original Weird Women of History lineup until I just randomly came across her online when researching about historical duels, because that's what I do in my free time. But she's badass, and she is a very important female military historical figure. I'm Elida Jen, and today we're talking about Kit Cavanaugh. So, to begin, Kit Cavanaugh, Christian Davies, both of these names are what Kit went by. Kit Cavanaugh was born in 1667 in Ireland to a semi-wealthy family. Her father was a brewer and owned a small country estate. At the time, her family was Protestant, though they served King James II. And for those of you who aren't real knowledgeable about 17th century history in England, the later half of the 17th century was fraught with a lot of wars. Mainly due to the fact that their monarch at the time was Catholic, and if you don't know, Catholic monarchs in England don't really have the best historical luck. Spoilers. He lost, and he was not successful in keeping the throne. Her father went off to war, and during these turbulent times, there were a lot of uprisings and rebellions. At one point, she stabbed a dude because they tried to burn down the Protestant church with her mother inside it, so that's pretty cool. After her aunt passed away, Kit ended up inheriting her aunt's public house and running it, and then marrying her aunt's servant, Richard Welsh. She describes Welsh in her memoir as a true romantic, this handsome, dashing boy that despite class differences, they fell in love with each other and, in fact, had a fairly successful marriage for the first few years. And the two of them ended up having 2 boys with a third on the way, until one day, Richard Welsh didn't come home. In 1681, Richard went to pay off a local brewer that they often purchased from. On his way home, he vanished. According to Christian at the time, she and her relatives went to the brewer and talked to him, and Richard had indeed gone, paid him off, and then went on his merry way. But oddly, other witnesses said that they saw Richard leave with another man, and nobody knew who this stranger was. At the time, there wasn't really a good Scotland Yard police detective investigation to be done. Like, people just would vanish. Usually it was assumed that they were robbed and killed and body thrown in the harbor or something, or just, decided they didn't want to be a family man anymore, which was very uncharacteristic according to Kit, and she knew something had happened and feared he'd been killed and just assumed the worst. 12 months after he disappeared, a letter arrived from Richard. According to Richard's letter, he ran into an old school friend, and the two of them decided to go out and get drinks. Richard, however, had a little too much, and next thing he knew, he woke up on a ship. Brief little history lesson for those of you who don't know what a press gang is. Essentially, they were naval people who would kidnap other unsuspecting men, get them drunk, or just, straight up kidnap young boys, take them to a ship, and put you to work. And usually you were signed up immediately to the Royal Navy, and you had no choice in the matter. Instead of just sitting idly by and saying, oh well, my husband disappeared, I guess I'll just have to, stay here in Ireland and take care of my pub and our children and just hope that maybe someday he'll come home. No, Kit decided that she was going to do something about it. She left her children with her mother, left her pub to close family friends, told them all she was going to London, and instead went to Dublin. On her travels, she chopped off her hair, put on her husband's clothes, and she claims that she was easily passable for a man because she was not well endowed. Once enlisted, she was sent to the Netherlands to serve in the 9 Years' War, where she was a good fighter but was pretty much immediately captured. However, her first cousin, Captain Cavanaugh, that is a tongue twister, who was an officer for the French military, who were the English's enemies, as they usually are, visited the prison often, and she was tempted to tell him, hey, you know, Mia to Mia, you're my cousin, I'm a girl, can you, like, get me out of this? But Kit was determined that she was going to find Richard at any cost, and maintained her composure, kept her identity a secret, and 9 days later, the English ended up making a deal with the Dutch and traded some prisoners. She got to go free. Once the prisoners returned to England, they were even granted a meeting with Queen Mary, who approached Kit and said that she was a pretty young fellow. Now we get to my absolute favorite story in this whole situation, and the reason I even discovered Kit in the first place. So, to maintain her cover, Kit decided that she needed to really act like a man. And what do young pretty boys do? They attempt to find a young, respectable wife. On her off time, Christian began to court a young local magistrate's daughter. According to Christian, she used all the nonsense which I often laughed at when they were used as snares against myself. Kit also stated that she became fond of the girl and felt incredibly guilty for toying with her. Kit even at one point considered telling the girl her secret because, one, she felt really guilty, and two, she considered the girl one of her closest female friends. Now, at the same time that Kit was seducing this girl, another sergeant in the military had his eyes set on her and was not a very nice guy. He wasn't like Kit, reciting poetry and telling this girl how beautiful she was. Instead, this sergeant got upset that the girl had rejected him and preferred Kit over himself, and he attacked her, tried to rape her. Luckily, a bunch of her neighbors overheard and rushed in and saved her. But I cannot express Kit's feelings better than herself. No sooner had she recovered and dressed herself that she went in search of and found me in my rank-standing arms. She told me what had passed and begged me to revenge the insult offered her. I was so irritated at this account that I could hardly contain myself. I was seized with a tremor all over my body, often changing color, and had I not been prevented by my duty, I should have that instant sought and killed him. After Kit got off her duty for the day, she went and sought out the sergeant, and in front of the whole camp, called him out, accused him of what had been done, and then challenged him to a duel. He accepted, and they went to a nearby windmill where they both drew their swords and fought, which back then was sort of considered iffy legally, but also in the military.
She stabbed at his shoulder, he sliced at her arm, she jabbed back, hitting him in the thigh, he jabbed forward, grazed her chest, and then she delivered the final blow.
And then a bunch of musketeers showed up and arrested them all as prisoners of war yet again. He was sent to a French hospital where he succumbed to his injuries, and she ended up being taken to prison. Luckily, the girl's father was incredibly grateful that Kit had gone out of her way to lose rank but also defend the honor of his daughter, and so he pulled some strings and got her out of prison. Once reunited, the girl asked Kit if they could be married, but Kit declined and said that her father would never say yes to such an arrangement between a low-ranking soldier and a magistrate's daughter. Instead, Kit promised that she would make a name for herself in the army and return and take the girl's hand in marriage, which she obviously never did. She was still looking for her current husband and didn't need a wife on the side. Kit skipped town and went and re-enlisted, this time in the Dragoons. Kit decided that this whole romancing young, impressionable girls was, a great cover. Like, how could she be suspected as a woman? She's flirting with other women. At a local pub, a woman tried to seduce Kit. Kit was having none of it. The woman ended up getting pretty offended, and a few months later came back and told Kit that she was pregnant with Kit's child, and told all the troops that it was Kit's child. Now, Kit was rightfully pissed off about this because obviously it wasn't her kid. But she needed to keep her cover. She didn't want to start up a whole thing and deny that it was her kid, because the only way to prove that it wasn't was to prove that she wasn't a man. She let the lady take her surname and provided child welfare from her army pension to this woman. After the child's birth, however, it did pass away fairly soon. For the rest of her military career, until her sex was discovered, they legit thought that Kit had a child that died after birth. Like, they legit thought that she was a man. There was no questioning her sex for the rest of her military career after that, which, in hindsight, it was a good cover. After the war with France, she returned to Dublin to check up on her family. She didn't even go and approach them, just basically, peeked through the windows, asked other people in town how they were doing, and her kids were grown up, her mother had passed on, everybody was fine. After another few years in the army, Kit ended up losing hope of ever finding Richard. In one of the battles, she was shot in the hip. Surprisingly, this isn't when her sex was discovered. No, she was shot in the hip. The doctors did pretty crappy surgery, apparently, and they didn't figure out that she was a woman. Go figure. Having healed up, she became an escort for prisoners of war for the dragoons. After the army and the prisoners had all marched into a certain town one evening, she sat back, watered the horses, and just was people watching. She recognized one of the men and watched as a Dutch woman came running up to him and embraced him and kissed him and declared how much she had missed him. See, that man that was embracing another woman, her husband that she'd been looking for 10 years. Yeah. Her shock was so apparent that a bunch of her buddies came over and asked, why are you so pale? You look like you're gonna be sick. She lied and said that she thought she might have seen her brother. She sat at the bar in the local pub and began to drink and thought over what she wanted to do next. She finally decided that the best course would be to have her friends approach Richard and ask, just to be sure, if he was in fact Richard Welsh. They came back, and it was, in fact, Richard. She downed the last of her beer, and after 12 years waiting for him to come home, she decided that she was going to confront him right then and there in front of this Dutch woman kissing up her man. And they received orders before she could finish finding him. They went to the next town. She dropped off the prisoners at a local workhouse. And then it was time to seek out Richard once and for all, to find him, confront him, and deal with him. She found him in the local public house with the Dutch woman. She went to the local pub manager, rented a room for the night, sat down, ordered a pint, and thought. Kit Cavanaugh had been a prisoner of war not once but twice by the French. She had fought in multiple battles at this point, been injured in multiple battles, and had disguised her sex by any means necessary. And yet, the idea of confronting Richard still made her break down. While sitting there, she burst into tears and began to cry for nearly half an hour before she built up the courage to calm herself and ask the waitress to go ask the man to come and approach her. This was her entire goal for the last 12 years, was to just find her husband, to just find him and take him back to England, or at least finish the war that he had been forced into with him. And there she found him, in a pub, with another woman. She hid her face in the shadows and beneath the brim of her hat as he came and sat down. He seemed confused, asking if this person had ever known him and why they had just suddenly, called him over to their table. Kit rebutted by asking if he had heard from his wife or if he had forgotten her. Richard became offended and yelled at her, saying how dare this random person accuse him of having forgotten his wife and his family. Then, after spending a good few minutes chewing out this random stranger in a pub, he realized that he was in fact scrutinizing his wife. He embraced her, tried to kiss her, knocked off her hat, and she shoved back, freaking out and yelling at him and getting rightfully pissed off. She accused him of being unfaithful, and he accused her of ignoring his misfortune. Then the Dutch woman arrived, asking why he had left her all alone. Richard snapped at the Dutch woman and told her to never approach him again. This only pissed Kit off more. She told the woman that he was in fact married and had 3 children. The Dutch woman broke down crying and explained that Richard had lied to her and claimed that he was going to marry her. Richard then denied the accusations that the Dutch woman was making, and Kit was able to sort of send the woman away and say, men suck, don't listen to them anymore, find someone better. After the woman left, Kit and Richard had to sit down and discuss what was going to happen next. Kit explained that now that she had found Richard to be unfaithful and having forgotten his family and his duties as a husband, she was dumping his ass, essentially. She was going to remain in the military service disguised as a man, but he was to only introduce them as brothers, and he was not allowed to come near her in any physical manner whatsoever. And if he ever attempted to reveal that she was in fact a woman, he would make a dangerous enemy from her. Her words exactly. After finding Richard, Cavanaugh served in the army still as a dragoon until she was injured during a battle and received a severe blow to the head. During this time, she was unconscious for quite a few days, and the surgeon in the army ended up discovering that she was a woman. After her secret was discovered, though, she continued to receive pay from the army and was actually allowed to continue traveling with them as a sutleress. Sutleress. That's like women who trade and work with other families in the local. I don't know. They do something. They like serve the army and help out. What are you doing?
Trying to be quiet so I don't disturb you.
You're disturbing me! So, after she was discovered, a bunch of her dragoon friends ended up chipping in. They bought her a wardrobe fit for a woman. Richard did not stay faithful, even though they were technically back together, and later on he ended up being killed in battle. My camera is dying and I have to essentially rush the ending of this. So essentially, after Richard dies, she becomes involved with a Captain Ross. Not Captain Ross Poldark, sadly. She doesn't end up marrying Captain Ross. She ends up marrying a guy named Hugh Jones, who also dies during battle. And after he dies, she returns to Dublin. She was granted a meeting with Queen Anne, and from the Queen, she received a pension for the rest of her life. After returning to Dublin, she married for a final time to a man named Davies. After returning to Ireland, she tried opening another public house, but decided that settling down wasn't for her, and she traveled throughout England with her new husband, using her celebrity status to support her income. And towards the end of her life, she ended up becoming the very first woman to become a Chelsea pensioner. For those of you who don't know, a Chelsea pensioner is essentially like an ex-soldier who gets to live in Chelsea at this little nice military facility for veterans, and it's been around for centuries. First few women to ever stay there were actually in World War II, but as it turns out, Christian Davies was the first woman to live there and be buried there. You can still see her grave. I couldn't find any actual photos of her grave specifically, but it's on record there, and I'm sure someone, if they really wanted to, could go and find it, which I would want to be that person, 110%. And my camera is literally at 1% battery life, and I'm going to sum this all up by saying, this has been Weird Women of History. I'm back. You know the drill. Since I don't upload on a consistent schedule because I'm a terrible YouTuber, you can hit the subscribe button down below, and probably the notification bell would be your best bet.